You don't live here anymore." He said it like he was telling me the weather. I was standing in my own doorway, Odelmira Vance, 72, still in the shoes I'd worn to buy groceries, staring at my suitcases dumped against the wall, clothes spilling onto the concrete like I'd been evicted in a hurry. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I asked him why my bags were outside. My voice didn't shake. He didn't answer, just stood there, blocking the entrance to the house I paid for long before he ever stepped inside. Then I heard movement behind him, soft footsteps, a woman's voice, and when I leaned just enough to see past his shoulder, she was there, wearing my robe. I reached for my keys. They didn't work. The lock had been changed. I looked back at him, and that's when he smiled, just slightly. And somewhere down the street, a car door slammed. The sound made Carrick glance past me for half a second, just a flicker, but it was enough. Enough for me to see that he wasn't as steady as he wanted to look. "Who is she?" I asked, keeping my hand on the door, keeping my voice level. The woman behind him didn't hide this time. She stepped closer, slow, deliberate, like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. My robe hung loose on her shoulders, the sleeves rolled, the belt tied wrong. Carrick didn't answer me. He just shifted his weight, pressing the door a little harder against my hand. "You need to leave, Odelmira. Leave." I let out a quiet breath, the kind you take when something settles instead of breaks. My eyes moved past him. I'm scanning the hallway, the umbrella stand, gone. The small oak table I kept by the wall, replaced. Even the curtains had changed. This wasn't sudden. This was arranged. "How long?" I asked. This time he met my eyes. "Long enough." Behind him, the woman crossed her arms, watching me like I was the one out of place, like I was the stranger at the door. I nodded once, slowly. Then I tried my keys again, more out of principle than hope. The metal scraped uselessly against the lock. Changed. Completely. Carrick exhaled, impatient now. "You signed everything. There's nothing you can do." Signed. The word didn't hit me all at once. It settled in pieces, like something I was supposed to recognize but couldn't quite place yet. I looked at him differently after that. Not shocked, not pleading, just measuring. Then I bent down. I picked up one of my bags and straightened. "Then you'd better hope," I said quietly, meeting his eyes. "You did it right." For the first time his expression slipped, and I realized he wasn't completely sure. The door didn't close right away. Carrick hesitated, just for a second, like he was deciding whether to say something else, whether to reassert control. Then he shut it firmly, the click of the new lock sealing it. I stood there, bag in hand, staring at the wood grain I had picked out myself 23 years ago. Across the glass panel beside the door, I caught a faint reflection. Mine. Small. Still. Not thrown off balance the way he expected. I turned and walked down the steps slowly, dragging the suitcase behind me. One wheel caught on the edge of the concrete, tilting it awkwardly. Clothes inside shifted with a dull thud, and he hadn't even packed them properly. At the bottom of the steps, I stopped and looked back at the house. My house. I bought it at 34, paid every installment, every repair, every tax bill. Carrick came much later, with his careful voice, his helpful habits, his quiet way of taking over things I didn't feel like arguing about anymore. "Let me handle that," You should rest. I'll take care of the paperwork. Paperwork. The word circled back. I set the suitcase upright and reached into my coat pocket, pulling out my phone. My fingers moved without hesitation, opening a folder I hadn't touched in weeks. Documents, scanned copies, old statements, property records. I scrolled, my eyes moving faster than they should have, at my age, but I wasn't looking for detail. I was looking for something missing, or something added, i.e. behind me. The door opened again. I didn't turn immediately. I told you to leave, Carrick said, sharper now. I glanced over my shoulder. He hadn't stepped outside this time, just leaned against the frame like he didn't want to risk crossing some invisible line. The woman hovered behind him again, quieter now, studying me more carefully. Who handled the filings? I asked, as if we were discussing something ordinary. Carrick frowned. What? The property filings, I repeated. Was it you? Or did you finally hire someone competent? A flicker. There it was again. I handled everything, he said. Of course he did. I nodded slowly and looked back at my phone. One document sat open now. Something recent. Something I didn't remember reviewing properly. My thumb hovered over the signature line. My name was there. But the spacing, the stroke, something about it felt off. Carrick shifted his stance. It's done, Odelmira. You signed it, legally. Legally. I let out a soft, almost amused breath. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket and picked up the second bag. You're very confident, I said. I'm correct, he replied. I adjusted my grip on the handle, then looked at him one last time, not with anger, not with grief, but with something that made his shoulders tighten without him realizing it. Confidence, I said quietly, and correctness aren't always the same thing. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped back, and the door shut again, this time faster. I walked toward the sidewalk, both bags in hand now, the weight uneven but manageable. Halfway to the street, I stopped and turned, not toward the house, but toward the row of homes across from it. Mrs. Halvan from number 12 was standing by her mailbox, pretending not to stare. Our eyes met. She hesitated, then said, Odelmira, I didn't know if I should say anything. I walked toward her. How long? I asked. She glanced at the house, then back at me. A while. He's been bringing her around. Thought maybe she was a relative at first, but she wasn't, I finished. Mrs. Halvan shook her head. No, and the last few weeks. Your lights were off, but they were inside, moving things, changing things. Weeks. So this wasn't a moment of impulse. This was a schedule, a plan. I nodded once, absorbing it, placing each piece where it belonged. Then I reached into my bag, not for clothes, but for a small pouch tucked between them. Inside were folded papers, older ones, originals, and something else. I closed the pouch again without showing her. Thank you, I said. She looked relieved, but also uneasy. Are you going to call someone? I met her eyes. I already did, I said, and right on cue my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and answered. Yes, I said calmly. I've seen it now. A pause as the voice on the other end spoke. My gaze drifted back to the house. Carrick's silhouette moved behind the curtains. They changed the locks, I added. Another pause. Then I listened, really listened this time. And as I did, my expression didn't harden, it settled. Good, I said quietly into the phone. Then we'll do it today. I hung up, Mrs. Halvern shifted nervously. Odell Myra, what's going on? I picked up my bags again. Something he thinks is finished, I said. I took a step toward the street. I was about to start. Behind me, the front curtain twitched, and I knew he was watching. I didn't leave, not really. Instead of walking away, I crossed the street and sat on the narrow wooden bench facing the house. My bags rested at my feet, one slightly open, a sleeve of my coat dragging against the pavement. From there I had a clear view of the front door, the windows, the subtle movements behind the curtains. My house. I pulled my phone back out and reopened the document Carrick had been so confident about. Property transfer, recent, my name signed at the bottom. I zoomed in slowly, studying the signature, not as a wife, but as someone who had signed her name on legal papers for decades. The curve on the V, the pressure on the last stroke, and it looked like mine, but it didn't feel like mine, and that difference mattered. The memory came back in fragments, white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, my hand weak, resting on a clipboard, Carrick beside me, steady, patient. It's just routine, he had said, insurance updates, nothing urgent. I remembered asking him to read it. I remembered him summarizing. I did not remember reading it myself. Across the street, the front door opened. Carrick stepped out this time, scanning the street until his eyes landed on me. There was irritation there now, something sharper beneath the surface. He hadn't expected me to stay. Celine appeared behind him a second later, barefoot again, arms folded. She leaned against the frame, like she was watching a scene unfold that didn't concern her. I held Carrick's gaze and lifted the phone slightly, not enough to threaten, just enough to signal. He stiffened. Good. A shadow fell across me, and I looked up to see Mrs. Halvern still lingering, but now joined by someone else walking past slower than necessary. People were noticing. That mattered too. My phone buzzed again. I answered immediately. "Tell me." Darren Cale's voice came through, calm, precise. "I've reviewed the preliminary copies you sent. The timing of the signature is questionable. Define questionable. Aggressively convenient," he said. "Signed during documented cognitive impairment. That alone opens a door." I glanced at Carrick, who was still standing there, watching, calculating. "Is it enough?" I asked. "Not by itself," Darren replied. "But you said you had more." I reached down, opening the small pouch in my bag just enough to see inside. Papers, notes, and the recorder. "I do," I said. Silence on the line for half a second. "Then don't wait," he said. "Where are you?" "Outside," I answered, eyes still locked on Carrick. "He's inside." Another brief pause. "I'm on my way," Darren said. "Stay where you are." The call ended. I slipped the phone away and closed the pouch carefully. Across the street, Carrick said something to Celine. I couldn't hear it, but I saw the way she frowned now, her earlier confidence thinning. He stepped fully outside this time, walking a few paces down the path. "Odell Myra," he called, voice controlled but tight. "This isn't necessary." I didn't respond. He took another step forward. "You're embarrassing yourself." That almost made me smile. Instead, I stood up slowly, brushing my hands against my coat as if I had all the time in the world. "I'm giving you a chance," I said. "For what?" he snapped. I walked a few steps closer, but not onto the property, not yet. "To correct a mistake," I said. His jaw tightened. "There is no mistake. I tilted my head slightly. Then open the door, I said. Let me walk back into my house. Celine shifted behind him, watching closely now. Carrick let out a short, humorless laugh. No. I held his gaze for a long second. Then I nodded once. Last chance, I said, quietly. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even pretend to consider it. So I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone again, and lifted it. Not to him this time, but slightly to the side. Then we'll do it properly, I said. Right then. A car turned onto the street and slowed to a stop directly in front of the house. Carrick's attention snapped toward it. The engine cut. The driver's door opened, and as a man in a dark coat stepped out, Carrick's confidence finally cracked. Carrick didn't move toward me this time. He moved toward the car. Fast, not panicked, not yet. But no longer in control. The man who stepped out adjusted his coat and closed the door with quiet precision. Derrin Cale. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. He simply walked forward like someone who already understood how this would end. A second door opened. A uniformed officer stepped out behind him. That was when Carrick stopped. Completely. I stayed where I was, letting them come to me instead. Odell Myra Vance? Derrin asked, though his eyes had already confirmed it. Yes. He gave a small nod, then turned his attention to Carrick. Mr. Vance, we need to discuss the status of this property. Carrick forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There's nothing to discuss. It's been transferred, legally. Has it? Derrin replied evenly. The officer stepped slightly forward, not aggressive, just present enough to shift the balance. Behind Carrick, Celine had retreated a step inside the doorway. She wasn't leaning anymore. She was watching, listening. Derrin continued. We've reviewed the documentation. There are irregularities, timing, consent conditions, and execution. Carrick's jaw tightened. She signed it. I'd like to confirm that, Derrin said, glancing briefly at me. That was my cue. I stepped forward, closing the distance just enough to be heard clearly, but still outside the threshold. Did I asked. Carrick looked at me sharply. You know you did. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small recorder. His expression changed, subtle but undeniable. You remember this? I asked. He didn't answer. I pressed play. For a moment there was only static. Then his voice, soft, controlled, familiar. Just sign here, Odelmira. It's standard. You don't need to read all of it. Another pause. Paper shifting. My voice, faint, slower than usual. What is it again? Insurance adjustments, he said quickly. We've gone over this. The recording ended. Silence settled over the front steps. Selena's face had changed. The confidence, the quiet, superiority, it drained into something uncertain, something calculating. The officer looked at Carrick. Sir, were these documents explained fully and accurately at the time of signing? Carrick hesitated. Just a second, but it was enough. They were handled appropriately, he said, but the certainty was gone. Derrin didn't press immediately. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Medical records, he said calmly, time-stamped. They indicate Miss Vance was under medication known to impair cognitive clarity at the exact time these documents were executed. Carrick's eyes flicked to me, then back to the folder. That doesn't invalidate. It opens the door, Derrin interrupted, still composed. Especially when paired with misrepresentation. The word hung there. Misrepresentation. Celine took another step back into the house. I watched her go, Watched the moment she realized this wasn't just a domestic argument, or this was something else, something heavier. Darren turned slightly toward me. You mentioned additional documentation. I nodded. Carrick's attention snapped back to me, sharper now. What documentation? I met his gaze, steady, unhurried. You thought this started in the hospital? I said. A pause. It didn't. His expression faltered again, deeper this time, because now he understood. This wasn't a reaction. This was preparation. I lifted the pouch slightly in my hand. I noticed, I continued, long before you thought I would. The officer shifted his stance. Darren watched me closely. Carrick said nothing, but his silence said enough. Carrick's silence didn't last long, but when he spoke again it lacked structure. What are you talking about? He said, sharper now, but uneven. You're making this into something it isn't. I didn't answer him immediately. Instead, I opened the pouch fully this time and handed it to Darren. Start with the dates, I said. He flipped it open right there on the walkway, scanning quickly but not casually. His posture shifted as he moved from one page to the next. Bank statements, withdrawal logs, copies of older property filings, unchanged, original, then handwritten notes, mine, dated months before the hospital. I began noticing small discrepancies, I said, my voice calm, carrying just enough for all of them to hear. Amounts that didn't match, documents moved, files missing and then returned, slightly different. Carrick shook his head immediately. That proves nothing. It proves a pattern, Darren corrected without looking up. And patterns establish intent, I continued. So I made copies, quietly, and I started recording conversations when things didn't feel right. Carrick's eyes flicked to the recorder in my hand again. That's paranoid, he snapped. No, I said. It's thorough. Darren closed the folder slowly and looked at the officer. We have enough here to formally challenge the validity of the transfer and to open an investigation into potential fraud and coercion. The officer nodded once and turned to Carrick. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the property while this is sorted. What? Carrick let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You can't be serious. This is my house now. Temporarily disputed, the officer replied. And under these circumstances you don't get to enforce that dispute by locking someone out. That landed. I harder than anything else. Carrick looked at me then, not with confidence, not even with anger anymore, but with something closer to realization. You planned this, he said quietly. I held his gaze. I paid attention. Behind him, Selene reappeared briefly, just long enough to grab a bag near the door. She didn't look at me this time, didn't speak. She walked past Carrick and down the steps, her pace quick, her expression tight. She understood the direction this was going, and she wanted no part of the aftermath. Carrick watched her leave, just for a second, then turned back to a situation that was no longer his to control. Collect what you need and step outside, the officer said. For the first time since I'd arrived, Carrick hesitated inside the doorway of the house, not blocking it, not owning it, just standing in it. Then he stepped back and moved aside. Darren glanced at me. Go ahead. I walked forward, up the steps, across the threshold, inside. The air felt different, not because it had changed, but because it had been taken and rearranged without me. Furniture shifted, curtains replaced, objects missing. I set my bag down slowly, ran my fingers along the edge of the table that wasn't mine anymore, then turned back toward the door where Carrick now stood outside, under the officer's watch. "You should have waited," I said, my voice even, carrying clearly through the open space. He didn't respond. "You rushed," I added. "That's where you failed." Derrin stepped in beside me, already making notes, already moving things forward. Outside, a neighbour had stopped again. Then another. People were watching now. Not guessing. Watching. Within days, everything moved exactly where it needed to. The property transfer was formally suspended, then reversed. Carrick's access to joint accounts frozen. An official investigation opened, built on documentation, recordings, and medical evidence. Fraud, misrepresentation, coercion, words that don't disappear once they're written down. Celine's name surfaced too, beneficiary, aware, present. She distanced herself quickly, but not cleanly enough. And Carrick lost the one thing he thought he had already secured. Control. A week later, the house was quiet again, truly quiet. No unfamiliar footsteps, no rearranged spaces, just stillness. I stood at the front door, the same one I had been locked out of, and turned the key from the inside. This time, it clicked exactly the way it always had. Secure. Final. I placed the key on the small table, my table, and looked around the room, letting my eyes settle on everything exactly where it belonged. Then I spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to fill the space. This house remembers who built it, and this time there was no one left to argue otherwise.